Hey, everybody, welcome back to Scar Stories. My name is Nicole Golden. I'm the host of the podcast. And I just want to encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to check out my website at NicoleGolden.org. We've got a bunch of blogs there and a lot of other podcasts. So, any type of thing that you're facing in your life, any sort of thing that you're walking through, those are the type of topics we try to cover in the podcast so that you can relate to other people and not feel as alone. And then, like I said, lots of different blogs on different things, and then a free prayer journal on there. If you subscribe with your email, you get sent that, and then just weekly emails from me. If you're like, my email inbox is just overflowing, you can unsubscribe after you get the prayer journal. No harm, no foul. But I am super excited about my guest here today. This is Darren Copeland, and I actually worked for him for 3 years, and we'll have to do another podcast just telling those stories because that was a fun 3 years for him, I'm sure. I think I was probably in your office more than the students were, but I'm excited to have him here. He works at Lakeland Christian School, and Darren, you are the assistant high school principal, or has that changed? Or help me out with what exactly your role is there at Lakeland Christian School in Lakeland.
I am the assistant principal for the high school. Most schools that would be called the principal, but because we have secondary combined, we divide it out. So
Okay. And Darren, or if you're a former student, Mr. Copeland is a rock star. I loved working for him. He was so easy to work for, and he really connects with his students, and is was just such a joy. Like, honestly, and I'm telling you the truth because I texted your wife this. So and wives tell each other the truth. But I said probably like the brightest part of LCS for me was working for Darren. So I'm really excited to have him on the podcast. And today, and I told Darren this, I'm looking down at my phone because my printer is not working. Wonderful modern issues. So I've got our questions written down. But the reason why I wanted to have him on the podcast today was because I'd overheard two moms of high schoolers talking the other day, and they were like, our kids are getting in fights at school about politics and coronavirus and masks. And like, this is crazy. Growing up, we never got into these conversations. We never had to handle these sorts of things. And so I wanted to have someone who was basically in ground zero there in the schools to talk to us a little bit about how our students are coping and how they're working through all of the political turmoil, the COVID turmoil, and just maybe even give us some insight. So, Darren, the first question we have written down, and this is just kind of a like, I mean, we could probably just stay on this question the whole time, but the first question I had sent you ahead of time was, how have you noticed high school students being affected by 2020 and beyond? Because 2020 is kind of bled into 2021. So, how have you seen this whole last year take a toll on students?
yeah, to start, I've heard it called 2020 Part Two. So hopefully
Yeah.
that doesn't continue. But um, to give you a little bit of background, I've been at Lakeland Christian for 14 years,
Mm,
and I've been in education for 25.
wow.
And I don't think as much as being around students and their parents has helped me to gain some expertise in this. I also have two high school students. I have a
Mm,
junior and a senior, which that may shock you, knowing how little they were when
yeah,
you
that's
were
nuts.
here. Um, but the so that helps me to have a little bit of insight as well.
Yeah.
Um, as far as our experience at Lakeland Christian, I would say that the because we've been on campus since the start of the school year, we had, just like everybody else, back in March, we went remote learning,
Yeah.
and then through the summer. Um, I would say that maybe our experience is a little different than some of the other schools that are doing hybrids or only have part of their students on campus now, or some schools are doing completely remote. But I would say in general, what we have seen is that our students seem a little more subdued, believe it or not.
Mm,
And that might seem a little, antithetical, but the reality is that because I think it's become part of their norm, they're just excited to be able to not be at home, to be on
mm,
campus. So some of the things that I normally deal with behaviorally, and as a teacher, you kind of know what those things are. I'm not dealing with to the same level.
okay.
So that's one thing that I've seen. I think that from a technical standpoint, we did have an online platform, and we still have it to some degree because we have students that have to quarantine and things like that. So they have to be able to stay plugged in. We're doing a live stream. But we have the kids who started the year online. They were struggling. Many of them were struggling in their performance. I think the
Mm,
isolation was a big part of that. I think you just don't get a feel
yeah,
for the class and even the interaction part. And so, and these are kids who historically have done well when they're on campus. They're AB students,
yeah,
and I think just the motivation's gone. I think the lack of accountability all played into them just low performance. It's sort of a who cares kind of
yeah,
attitude. And I've had a lot of discussions with people whose kids aren't in our school who said they've experienced the same thing. But since Christmas, we pulled everybody offline and brought them back on campus, and we've seen them improve right back to where they were before. So
yeah,
there's something about just kind of the brick and mortar being, butts in the seat, so to speak,
yeah,
that makes a difference. They seem to appreciate being on campus. I mentioned that that they can be at school when a lot of their friends in their neighborhood or relatives that are at home. Um, and I think that helps them not to focus too much on the circumstances of
mm,
what's going on around them, and kind of gives them a positive distraction.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's so true. It's funny because this summer we took a little mini vacation to Anna Maria Island. And while we were there, we were swimming in the pool, and I saw these two high school students get into this conversation with this older woman. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening to the things that are coming out of these high school students' mouths. And I'm just like, flabbergasted, like that they would know this much about politics, that they would be this invested. And I started thinking about the timing of it. Like they had been home, like you said,
Mhm.
almost like nationwide. Everybody had been home from March all through the summer. And so just inundated by it, especially as parents, as we're trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we, crisis school? That's what Bryant and I call it. We're like, this isn't homeschooling. We didn't choose this. This is crisis schooling. So how do you crisis school a child and still work and still, try to maintain your marriage and everything else? And so I think you're right. I think the kids were just totally bogged down with it from March and then throughout the summer. And then they were those that were able to go back to brick and mortar were kind of able to get back into real life and the way things should be. Um,
Mhm.
and I always think of that verse in Proverbs. It's in Proverbs 18:1. It's out of the SV, but it says, "He who isolates himself is not wise." And we were never meant to be isolated. And I think just the
Right.
isolation and not being able to interact really does play on us in so many different ways. And so I know some parents are high risk, some kids are high risk, and you just can't get your kids in community. But as best as you can try to get them connecting, even via Zoom or different ways, kids need it just as much as adults. How so maybe, maybe you haven't sensed this as much, but initially when they came back in the fall, was there any fear, apprehension with the students? Did you sense about coronavirus? Was there any fear, apprehension, walking through some of these elections? We're not going to get political, but I'm just saying, like, overall, did you sense any of that with the students, or for the most part, did you just sense a relief to be back together?
Well, I sensed it in myself,
Yeah.
so I know that there was angst and some fear in the element of, what's it going to be like.
Yeah.
You know, I think the biggest concern was, you can put all the protocols and processes in place, but what's that going to look like when the rubber really hits the road?
Yeah.
When you do have kids who get sick or there's a spread, or are we going to be in school or are we going to be out of school? So all of the contingency plans that we put in place, they're contingency plans because you just don't know what's going to happen. So there was fear and angst amongst the
Yeah.
administrators and the teachers, and that weighed really, really heavy
Hmm.
on us. So I'd be remiss to say that the kids didn't have some element of fear, but I think that was early on, and it was more about the unknowns
Yeah.
of what to expect. So,
Yeah.
like I said, we did have students that started the year because there were families who were really fearful.
Yeah.
And now I would say, in our communication with other schools that said, "Hey, we're going to be on campus," but they were kind of offering this other platform as well. We had probably about 12% of our students start the year at home.
Okay.
But I would say by the end of the first quarter, we were in single digits. Before Christmas, we were at about 3%.
Okay.
Now, that's people who they weren't sick and being quarantined. That was people who were just saying, we feel more comfortable at home.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but that kind of lent us to the decision that people they want to be here. They just wanted to see if we could pull this off and do it
yeah,
safely. And so after Christmas, we kind of pulled everybody back on
yeah.
campus. But I would say, to kind of follow up on that, I think that we're seeing more of the parents' fear projected on the kids
Mm,
than the kids fear themselves. You know what I
mhm.
mean? And if you have an anxious child, then obviously they're going to be more anxious about, they're sensing that you're concerned.
Yeah,
But the kids are far more concerned about the normal stresses,
yeah,
about school, about grades, about social interactions, and where they fit, and social media and things like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So I would say that the fear was more on the adults' part. Quite honestly, kids are very resilient, as you know.
Mm,
And so I think that yes, there was fear, but I don't think it was to the extent where it was crippling people.
yeah, yeah. And I think like you um said it's as parents we have to be so careful of the conversations we're having with our kids and the things we're talking to about with our kids because they're going to carry that into wherever they're going. And for us, we're very clear with our kids over the summer, like, yes, we've got to do, what the CDC is asking us to do. We've got to do what people who are, studying this and on the front lines of this are asking us to do, whether we like it or not. And I'll never forget one time Brooke's my 8-year-old, and she was like, Mommy, I don't like wearing masks, but I'll do it, And I was like, that's the spirit. I don't like wearing masks either. But if it lets us go back to Disney World or go back to school, then let's do it. And then let's sanitize and let's, take the necessary precautions and do the best we can to keep safe while still trying to re-enter into life. And so Bryant and I've really tried to take a positive approach to it. Now we've also been very honest with the kids, like, during Christmas and stuff, a lot of stuff was shut down and it sucked for the kids. And so our kids say words they probably shouldn't, but at one point, Brooke was like, coronavirus sucks. It's stupid. And I was like, you know what? Yes, you can feel those emotions too. So I think just approaching it well as a parent and giving your kids a positive, healthy framework of what they're facing is so important. Um, have you noticed students getting involved in the mask, no mask debate or political debates or anything like around the election? Was there any of that going on at the school? Or like you said, are they mainly just consumed with, clicks and grades and clothes and everything else?
Well, to the point that you made just a moment ago, I think early on, when we get everybody back on campus and we try to do assemblies and things like that, of course, at the beginning of the year, we weren't doing any assemblies. So we
Yeah.
had videos that they're viewing in class and that type of thing. But, one of the messages that we really tried to convey was, we don't like the masks either. I don't
Yeah.
know anybody on the planet who's, like, yeah, I mean, I really would rather wear a mask than not. But what the message that we put out there is it's what allows us to
Yes.
keep the doors open.
Yeah.
And so many of them were so elated to be back on campus, not even so much for school, but just for the social aspect and to
Yes.
not be sitting in the same four walls every day, And so I think they bought into, the idea that, okay, the school doesn't even like the mask thing.
Yeah.
Um, because we have parents on both sides of it. You have
Yep.
people who are saying, listen, if we're not wearing masks, then I'm not sending my kid to school. And
Mhm.
then you have parents who say, well, if we are wearing masks, I'm not sending my kid to school.
Yeah.
And but cooler heads have seemed to prevail in that. And I think the kids bought in pretty early on that, yeah, let's just do this so we can be here,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they want to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
And I see a pinhole of light, but
Yeah.
it's still gone on way longer than I ever thought that it would. So, but it is, it is what we've been, confronted with, and so we're trying to deal with it. But
Yeah.
to specifically answer the question, I think that it's been more like we see it more in their compliance or non-compliance.
Okay.
If they're really against masks, I mean, it's one thing, you take a little mask break for a second to get
Yeah.
fresh breath of air. But if you have kids who like you're walking down the hallway and you have no mask on, and it's like,
Yeah.
what are you doing,
Yeah.
that probably says more about their take on it than that they're, picketing out in the parking lot,
Yeah.
that they don't want to do it. So I would think that, as you would suspect, so many of them kind of feed off of their parents'
Mm,
energy with that, so if mom's really outspoken about it or dad's really outspoken about it, the kids will kind of pick that up.
yeah.
But teenagers are, they're pretty unpredictable, as you know, and so sometimes they get that string of independence. They don't really follow what mom and dad think, and they're okay, whatever it takes to be able to be here with my friends. That's
Yeah.
what they're willing to do.
Yeah.
I think, not to get too political,
No.
the as far as those kind of debates go, not a lot of real structured stuff. It's more kind
Mhm.
of impromptu conversations that take place. You made the comment that the kids were basically at home watching, CNN and Fox News from March till July, and so they all became,
Political analysts.
political experts, and
Yes.
I like to call it the Harvard lawyer, homeless guy. You know what
Yes.
I mean? It's just like you're going to sit here and you're going to tell me all, what the law says, and you live under a bridge, and
Yeah.
so there's a level of ignorance that can be dangerous there,
Yes.
and
Yes.
so they do, they do have their own opinions and things that they've gleaned and picked up, and again, influence from their parents. But that kind of comes out in a very immature way.
Mhm.
So it's, basically, if you're a Republican, then you're this. If you're a Democrat, then you're this, and it's just because they're different. And a lot of times they don't even know the policies that those things represent. They just kind of know, what side that they choose,
Yeah.
and so there's some of that, and that's part of our job. And this, having been in
Yep.
the classroom, that we're trying to help shape them. We're trying to mold
Yes.
them to understand that, to have a constructive conversation. And here, obviously, from a biblical perspective, what does that look like? Wait, you can really be a Christian and a Democrat? Oh my goodness, what a
Okay.
surprise! I know.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a lot of adults who don't understand that concept
Yep.
either. But so those are things that we're trying to help them work through. I mean, we see things like, we've kind of adopted the policy of, think about it with the masks. We didn't do a dress code type mask, so it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be an LCS mask. So they can wear whatever, they can be creative with it. But we said we don't want any political
Mm,
slogans. We don't want any social groups, that can be
yeah.
controversial. So we've tried to avoid that. So we might take kids somewhere and someone will wear a hat, and they say, hey, listen, we talked about that. We take the hat. Kids have always complied.
Yeah.
um, but that can be offensive to people, and so it's not our goal to be offensive. And certainly as a school, we're kind of apolitical, quite honestly. I
Yep.
mean, obviously there's tendencies in Christian organizations, so
Sure.
people associate the school to that, but the reality is that, you point that out to us, we're going to take care of it. If somebody has a flag on their car, that's a little different than a bumper sticker, but so
Yeah.
bumper stickers, flags, hats, we'll just say, hey, listen, those are things that can cause division, and that's not what
Yes.
we're about. And so,
Yes.
we're going to ask you to take care of it. And the kids have really always complied. So that hasn't been too much of an issue. But understanding that there are people that, that I can't walk in their shoes, and that
Mm,
there are things that they've experienced in their lives that they believe certain political parties or politicians represent.
mhm.
And we want to do everything we can to help them feel comfortable to be in this place. So
I love
we're
that.
trying to be as apolitical as we possibly
Yes.
can. And then when those things do come up, just to try to walk the kids through that. Sometimes that's easier to do than their parents. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
Yes.
part of that's just from life experience.
Yeah, yeah.
But and so that's kind of what we've seen, as far as, the debating, or there's not a lot of fighting going on about those things, but the potential's there.
Yes.
So you kind of feel like you're the sentry, that you're always on guard, that you're trying to, you're standing on the wall just trying to keep it from happening.
Yeah.
And things are gonna seep in, and we're gonna have to deal with those. But that's part of what we do. That's part of student development,
Yep.
from a Christian perspective.
I mean, you said so many good things, like my head's exploding, but I think like specifically, so Lakeland Christian, for those who don't know, it's in Lakeland, Florida. And I mean, it's considered a college preparatory school. The academics, the athletics, everything is top notch. It's incredible. I taught there for 3 years, and I mean, these students graduate and go off to do incredible things. They've got so many awesome programs, and one of my favorite things that they have there is their special needs programs for autistic children and kids with special needs. And so it's just an incredible school, and God's really blessed there. But one of the things that you said was, that the school really should be apolitical. And it's funny, Bryant and I pastor at Centerpoint Church in Valrico, Florida, and we've gotten some criticism at times about, well, we don't know where you guys stand politically. And we're like, exactly. Like, you shouldn't know where we stand politically, because the moment you take a side, you're alienating people. And then what happens is it's exactly what you said, Darren. Like, we don't know people's experiences. We don't know what they've had to walk through and why they stand politically one way or the other. And so just sometimes slowing down and being able to have conversations. But I think in this climate that we're in, and one of the things that I've learned, and my counselor, Dr. Kevin Hull, was actually one of Darren's best friends back in high school. So it's funny to talk about. But one of the things Kevin's always taught me is, like, usually we have this much emotional margin. And when we've walked through a year like 2020, our emotional margins getting knocked down, knocked down, knocked down. So, like, things that usually we should be able to just blow off, we're engaging in angrily, and the lid's flying off and everything's going crazy. And so I think we've seen a lot of that with people where they can't just have benign political conversations. Instead, like, they're coming in guns ablazing, feeling like they're getting personally attacked. And we've got to be able to take a step back and just have conversations, and be able to walk in other people's shoes and understand where they're coming from. But then I also love that at the school you're creating a safe place. So, like, if there are things that could potentially cause a situation to arise, like, you guys are just trying to get rid of the distractions. And that's the same thing that we try to do at Centerpoint. Like, we're trying to remove every distraction so people can come in and meet Jesus. You guys are removing every distraction so these kids can come in and have a safe place to learn. And I love that. And excuse me, one thing I know personally Darren is so good at is just engaging the students and meeting them right where they were at. And that was one thing I really loved about LCS teaching there, was like, I was allowed to have conversations with the kids and let them kind of and I taught English. And so it was a really great, like, environment to let the kids kind of open up about what they were frustrated with or what they were trying to work through, and just kind of push them and get them to see other sides. And so I love that that's what you guys are doing. I hope the parents see how lucky they are, to have an environment like that for their students. Um, have
Well,
you
Nicole,
Oh yeah, go
to the no, no problem. No, to the point that you try not to take a side. Um, the less you say, the more people fill in the gaps for you,
yes.
and so they'll make accusations and assumptions that aren't
Isn't that
true, and they're
fun?
not fair. But I don't think you're going to change their mind
No.
either. So you just keep loving well,
Yes.
and you'll get accused of things that you just want to defend yourself, and you have to realize, like, that really doesn't do any good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to keep pointing people back to Jesus, and to steal the mission statement of Warm Beach, which is a camp that we go to out in Stanwood, Washington. We take our seniors there every year. Their slogan is, they want to clear the path to the cross.
Mm,
So they want to do everything really, really well. So when people are there, their experience is nothing but being able to see where Jesus is and everything.
I love
So,
that.
they want the food to be good, they want the accommodations to be good, they want the service to be good. Because if people are not focusing on the frustration of those things, then they can focus on what they're really there for.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that is a huge part of what we're trying to accomplish. And unfortunately, there's sin, right? And so we're
Yeah.
never going to be able to totally eliminate people's frustration or anger or misinterpretations. But if we consistently keep doing what we're doing, I think God blesses that.
Yes, I agree. And when you look at the gospels, I mean, Jesus was called all sorts of things, right? Like,
Sure.
he was called like a son of Satan, all sorts of things. I mean, and so yeah, Brian and I've experienced a lot of that throughout this past year. I mean, we've been called all sorts of names, and we just sit back and, like, where are you coming up with this stuff?
Mhm.
Like, but yeah, you just kind of have to sit there and just take it, and, like you said, love well. I mean, Jesus did not align himself politically in the scriptures. And gosh, he could have, but he didn't. And that was part of the Jews' problem at the time, was they really wanted him to speak out against the Roman Empire. And instead he's paying taxes and doing everything, correctly. And so yeah, I love that. Loving well and clearing, what was it? Clearing a path to the cross. That was
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I love that. Um, so I'm glad you interrupted me there, and that's what you have to do. Have you seen this past year take, that? Have you seen this past year take a toll on the kids' mental health at all? When I was over there, I just spoke at LCS to the Shield Maidens, the moms there, and I had heard you guys had hired a psychologist who was there like 20, 30 hours a week, which I love that. And then I met another young lady who was a college prep counselor. And so it seems like you have a number of people on staff there to help mentally. Have you seen, anxiety and depression rise through this year, or not so much?
Um, so the short answer is that I think that we'd have our head in the sand if we wouldn't say that there's got to be some in elevated level of anxiety and depression. Um, I'm not sure that we always see it here at school.
That's true.
Usually what happens is the moment that the kids walk out in the afternoon and get in the car is where they fall apart,
Mhm.
and but we haven't seen a huge increase in kids who are coming down to meet with counselor or anything more than usual.
Yeah,
Um, I think that, quite honestly, we probably won't be able to accurately answer that question till sometime down the road.
you're right. Yeah.
Sometimes those seeds are planted, and you don't really understand what the fruit of those is going to be, for 6 months or a year or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I will say this just to back up a moment, but a couple of years ago, I had a student graduate from here, and he called me over the summer. And quite honestly, I think he called me while he was under the influence of something, and he was just kind of throwing up in on my voicemail.
Yeah.
And he
Awesome.
said "Can we meet for lunch?" And I was like, "Yes, let's
Yeah.
do it." Of course,
Yeah.
I'm like, I have no idea what he wants to meet about. But when we did meet, and I was kind of talking about his message and stuff like that, he almost didn't even remember leaving the message.
Mm,
And but what we got to talk about is, he says, I have struggled with mental health issues for years.
mm.
Um, and so much of that comes through adolescence and hormone changes and life circumstances and just their experiences. But he said LCS doesn't do enough
Mm,
to address the issues of mental health.
mm.
And I said, yeah, I don't think we do anything. This
Yeah,
was
yeah,
like I said, a few years back.
yeah,
And so we really became purposeful in how we shape our chapel time, the topics that we talk about in our relationship ed, which is run through our Bible classes. Um, and we've really made a concerted effort to bring people in from our community who are professionals, like Dr. Hull, where they can speak to a class, or some of the other, great, psychologists in our community who are working with some of our students, even where they come in, and one, it just puts a face in front of these kids that if there is somebody that they need to talk to about these things, they can.
yeah,
That it's okay to talk to people about these things. I mean, we brought in this girl last week. Her name's Nicole Golden, and she talked to our moms.
yeah.
But that seems, to you, that's like, yeah, well, I mean, I just came in to talk to them about my story and my experience. But that's a huge step in the direction of
Mm,
getting the parents, to understand where their part is in this.
yes.
So we've really made a concerted effort to take the whole mental health phenomenon, and we call it a phenomenon. This is only because it's been recognized more in the last 5 to 10 years.
You're right.
But to take it seriously, because these are precious young minds that, what, they may outgrow some of this, but man, we gotta get them through it with as few scars as possible.
Yeah, yeah,
So, part of that, I talked earlier about, we had kids who started the year online, and I think the isolation from that really affected their performance. I mean, there are some kids that really thrive on that,
yeah.
but I think down the road, they'll probably realize that they have some social issues anyway, because
Mhm.
if you thrive in isolation, there's probably something you probably need to talk
That's
to
tough.
somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've seen that part of it, you know what I mean? And to get them back on campus, and to just, it's almost like the color returns to their face, you know
Yes.
what I mean? It's just like they just seem healthy and really thrive and get plugged back in. I would say more frustration than anxiety or fear,
Mm,
over protocols. I mean, there's a lot of little rules and things that are in
yes.
place that are frustrating. Or, the fact that at any moment the person that you eat lunch with could test positive and you have
Yep.
to go home for 2 weeks. That's frustrating. As a matter of fact, my
Yeah.
son's sitting at home right now because one of his friends that he eats lunch with tested positive, and he's at least asymptomatic, if not
Yeah.
completely healthy. And so dealing with that kind of stuff is frustrating. The
Yeah.
thing I like to see about that is they go, I don't want to go home. I don't want to sit on a computer all day. I do want to be with my friends.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that just goes back to what scripture tells us, what secular psychology tells us, that people thrive in community.
Yes. Yes, 100%. And I think you're exactly right. It's funny because I laugh with Bryant all the time. I'm like, if you're gonna know what kids grew up during 2020, because like even my 4-year-olds, like we went to the park for the first time in probably a year, a couple weekends ago, and Brooke is my socializer, and she started making friends with this other little girl, and Braxton's like, "Mommy, she's too close. She's standing," and it's like, they know like 6 feet masks, don't touch, don't hug, and it's just so crazy the things that they've had to grow up with, and figure out and understand. But I think
That's
you're
unnatural.
yeah, it really is. It's sad, but do you experience this at Lakeland Christian? We experience this at the church. So like, parents get busy in their own lives and kind of ignore things with their kids, and then their kids get to a breaking point and they're almost like, they come to the church and like, okay, fix my kid. It's like, all right, there's about 10 years of fixing that needs done. And so like we've got to call on the professionals now, like you need to go see a counselor. And do you experience that at all at LCS? Like the parent gets in a tricky place with their kid and like, okay, fix them.
Well, this may be controversial, but I think parenting is the real pandemic that we're dealing with right now, or lack thereof.
Preach, preach. Yeah.
But I think that as a school, we have trended toward um, parents not only expect us to teach their children academics and worldview. We've become the church to a lot of families, which is unfortunate, and I
Yeah.
don't I don't condone that.
Yeah.
We've also become the mental health professionals to a lot of these families, and that's backwards. That's not how
Yeah.
it's supposed to be. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, I mean we do see that. We do
Yeah.
see, people that have, I think, for whatever reason, they just haven't parented well. They've kind of neglected those responsibilities. What is the most psychology says that by age 4, the majority of the influence and shaping that your
Yeah.
children will learn from has taken place.
Yeah.
Well, that's before they even come to us.
Yeah.
So man, talk about the responsibility that we're putting on daycares and preschools, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but I do see that. I do see that that there's and I love the fact that, okay, now we've hit this point of desperation where we recognize that things aren't the way that they should be, and we need all
Yeah.
the help that we can get. So at least people are asking for help. I mean,
Yeah.
because the true neglect obviously is that you just continue to allow that pattern of unhealthy behavior to continue. But yeah, I think that the expectation, especially of a Christian school, is probably pretty unrealistic for a
Mhm.
lot of our parents.
Yeah. And I think that's always been, if I can speak honestly, and I don't know how else to speak, but I think that's always been a little bit of my concern with Christian schools. I love what LCS is doing, but I think parents are like, okay, we're going to put our kids in the Christian school. Now we don't have to be as, on it with church attendance and making sure they get plugged into a youth group and get a good small group leader. And we don't have to be as concerned because they're getting Bible every day. And I've had a couple parents come to our church and I'm like, hey, where's your kids? And like, oh, well, they're at the Christian school. They're getting Bible every day. So they don't think they need to come to church. And I'm like, oh, like that's,
Yeah.
and same things can happen in homeschool families. And I'm not trying to alienate anyone. This is me talking, not Darren. But you're home all the time, you're around other Christian organizations and stuff, and so you think your kids are getting what they need, and they're not. Like this is a good someone used the chair analogy, like Christian school, Christian education, that's a good leg on the chair, but you need the school, the family, the church, Christ. You need all four legs for this chair to stand up straight. And so um I one thing I will say, because Darren won't brag on himself, but his wife and I were joking around about how we stalk each other on social media, and like we haven't hung out physically very much, but like Jen and I know a lot about each other just from like, stalking each other on social media. That's what we do. But he mentioned his two sons, and I know that you have a really good relationship with your boys. I know you and Jen are very involved in your church, and you're very involved in a community group. Your boys are. And so can you just speak to parents? I guess we'll kind of just end on this. It's kind of combining the last two questions, but just speak to parents about the importance of creating, making sure their children are connecting in a local church, making sure their kids are being poured into by other believing adults, small group leaders at church, or, youth leaders at church. And it's not, partnering now when their kids are young so that they don't get to crisis mode. Like, how, I guess I'm talking in circles. How do you, as a parent, because you've walked through this and you've got a good relationship with your boys and they're, junior, senior, that's to me success. So, how have you and Jen personally created safe places at home and made it a priority to get them into community in order to get them to this place of health as a junior and senior in high school?
You spoke earlier about margin, and you were talking
Mhm.
about emotional margin, but I think just personal margin is a huge part of what things am I going to give up so that I can make a
Mm,
priority of other things. And raising our children has been, quite honestly, our number one priority. And raising our children um, in a godly home,
mm,
uh, in an effort to connect them. I hear the term all the time, to put them in the way of the gospel, to put them
yes.
in situations where, so to have them in church regularly, to do family devotions together, to put them in a Christian school where, yes, they are getting Bible every day, but that's not enough. They need on Sundays to hear their pastor share his heart based on what God has laid. So
Yeah.
there's no substitutes. I think that, in some ways there are a lot of things that are pulling at our time, whether that's really, competitive sports, or a vacation home, or the boat, or whatever that is.
Mhm.
But family time is huge.
Mm,
The quality of family time, what things you make important, are, that's a big part of it. I mean, but just having conversations around the dinner table, that's
yes.
a huge part of. So, but if you're not reading the word, one of the conversations you can't have is, well, what did you read today? What have you been
Mhm.
studying today? When they're young, what they read and what they study, it's kind of whatever you put in front of them,
Yeah.
and you kind of guiding them and what that looks like, so that one day when they're adults, well, guess what? I turned around yesterday and they were adults, and it's hard to believe. But so now when we have those conversations, it looks different, because my junior, he's reading something in Luke right now,
Mm,
and he's doing it through a community Bible reading program that we have in our network of churches. And then my other son, my senior, he's doing something with the youth pastor where they're doing a discipleship thing, and they're both being discipled by other adults. So they're getting one-on-one time. They're also getting, group therapy time, if you want to call it that, where they're just part of a group. And the funny thing is that those groups aren't both part of our youth group. Like my one son, yeah, his group is part of our youth group. My other son, that group is part of one of our sister church youth groups.
mm,
But that's where his friends are. But I think that there's something about that, like that community piece. You
yes.
talked the other day about, church and community and counseling, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
that community piece is huge, because that's where we're drawn, where our affections lie.
yeah,
And of course the ultimate goal is that our affections lie in Christ, right? The
yeah,
other C, the fourth C.
yeah.
But um but the reality is that being able to have those conversations around the table, what are you reading, what kind of things are you going through, because Jenny and I are doing Psalms, so we're
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
all in a different place. But that independent study is huge. Like, that's what you pray for as a parent, that your kids get there someday. And my boys are both very, very different. I'd love to be able to say that we can take credit for the successes that they have, but then we'd have to take credit for the blame as well,
Exactly.
or the blame for the failures. But the reality is that another part of the answer to that question is that at some point you realize, like, wow, I'm really out of control.
Mm,
And God has created them, and He's designed them the way they are, and they're wired a certain way, and it's very, very different from each other. It's different
mm,
from us in a lot of ways. And so that prayer piece, like, it's when you come to that realization that, like, I can't do this on my own. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a fixer. Part of the nature of my job is to fix problems and help people to kind of logically see, you know, where the middle ground is, so to speak. It's when you realize I can't fix this,
Mm,
that you really surrender, you know. And
yeah.
so creating what I can, those times that we can, is important. Trying to, you know, love them well and to develop them into independent lovers of Jesus,
Mm,
you know, which is a lot easier said than it is done.
mhm.
um, and then really just surrendering them over, realizing, like, listen, they're not mine anyway, you know,
Mm,
I'm just sort of stewarding them,
yes.
which is heartbreaking when
Yeah.
you come to that realization. But it's also freeing, you know,
Yes.
as a parent. So um, I think that that's probably the biggest part of raising kind of healthy, godly young men. Now, listen, they're going to leave my house and they're going to go off to college and they're going to become even more independent. So
Yeah.
what I'm hoping is that we've instilled some of those habits and some of that muscle memory
Yeah.
into them, that they're going to want to get plugged in with a Christian community on campus, and that
Yeah.
someone else is going to then take up that load and help carry them to the next level until one day they're doing that for other people.
Yeah. But I think what's cool is you've created, a friendship with your boys.
Mhm.
Because like what you said, like from one, and I've heard it 1 to 4, 1 to 5, are the years where, like you said, most of the parenting takes place. And then Andy and Sandra Stanley talk about this. And then like 5 to 7 is, there's like coaching training, but then when they get to about the 18, that's when it starts to turn more into a friendship. And so when they go off to college, yeah, you know what? I mean, every college student's going to make poor choices, but you've instilled this safe place for them to be able to come back and talk to you about it. And you've put in the time and earned the right for them to come and speak to you about these things. And I think that's what sometimes parents forget is like, right now, while your kids are in your home, you are earning the right to be able to speak into their life later on. And what I mean by that is like, we're like, well, we're parents. We should be able to, no, you have to build a relationship with your kids. If there's no relationship, there's no right to speak into their lives. And just because you're the parent doesn't mean there's a relationship there. And I love how you talked about like, creating the margin. And I'm sure you and Jen have said no to a lot of stuff in order to say yes to your boys. And what I mean by that is to be present there for them. And I think they do. I mean, it's not like your boys don't do anything. I think they both are athletic, right? Or they're involved in some extracurricular stuff. It's not like they just go to school and come home. Um,
Right. They've been involved in a number of sports over the years, and they're involved in extracurricular activities, whether it's band or, you know, other things like that. So
so they're not, my
they
point is they're normal boys. It's not like they're,
yeah, and they have a part-time job, so they're both working.
I love that.
Yeah, and it's not the kind of thing where it's just like, well, we say no to everything else so that,
Yeah.
because that's not healthy either, because
No.
that creates you know, that desire to want to rip away and just run, you know. And
Yes.
you know, you had talked about this in your own story, that you and I grew up in that generation where the church that our parents went to was just very legalistic, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I don't mean a specific church, I'm talking about the church in general at
In
that
general.
point.
Yeah. I'm with you.
And I think that a big part of the problem with that is that there was this expectation of, even though we knew it wasn't real, that there's this perfectionistic
Mm,
persona.
yep.
And I think it's okay to be real with your kids and to have kind of ugly conversations, you know what I mean, stuff that
Yeah.
our parents would have never talked to us about.
Yep.
And not that it's inappropriate or anything like that, but what it is it helps them to realize that when the day comes where they really have to be able to discuss real down and dirty issues in their
Mhm.
life, that they don't go, I can't talk to my parent
Yep.
about that. You
Yep.
know what I mean? And it doesn't mean
Yep.
it's carte blanche and anything goes. That's not healthy, because they need to
No.
see you as an authority. They need to see you as someone. You know, I've always used kind of that, you know, you start out as a parent and you become a teacher and then you become a coach. And I'm kind of we're in the coaching years right now,
Yeah.
but it's not gonna be real long. We're just gonna be the cheerleaders,
Yeah. Oh,
you
I
know, where
love
we're on
that.
the sideline and
I
we're
gotta write
rah
that
rah on
down.
them. We're
Yeah.
rah rah on them along. And but that's the time in life where they come to you for advice, because right
Yeah.
now they know everything, you know what I mean, and you kind of know nothing.
So fun.
But but the reality is that it won't be very long, and you become relevant to them in a
Mm,
really big way. And again, that just goes back to how much time are you spending on your knees,
yes.
because this is where, you just have to go, God, they're yours,
Yeah.
and I have to commit that to them,
I'll every
to
once
him.
in a
So
while like creepily sneak into my kids' rooms and just get on my knees on the floor in their room and just pray over them like when I actually like them when they're asleep. Just joking. I like my kids all the time, but we're at this stage now where it's just crazy. And so with 4, 8 and under. And so I'll wait till they go to sleep and then I'll just pray over each of them individually. And I love that you said we're stewards because like that's what I tell people all the time. Like, yes, it's heartbreaking, but also it almost takes the pressure off a little bit. And like, God specifically chose you for your boys. God specifically chose me for my kids. And when I'm talking to parents with kids with special needs and they just feel so overwhelmed, and like, God specifically chose you, He's equipped you for this. So, like, take the pressure off because if God didn't think you could handle it, you wouldn't have those kids. So you said parent, trainer, coach, cheerleader. Did I get that right?
yeah,
I
parent,
love that.
teacher,
Oh,
parent, teacher,
teacher.
coach, cheerleader. Yeah.
Teacher. Okay. I had to write that down. That was good. I love that. Well, Darren, I really appreciate this. This was a lot of fun and really insightful. And I love how we started out like, kind of like teacher, administrator into parenting. I think this is going to be so helpful and encouraging for parents. Is there anything else that you want to add before we get off? Because I know sometimes, people think through things and then I end the recording. They're like, I wish I would have said. So is there anything you want to add before we?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, this is kind of an a shaky time. The footing seems a
Mm,
little uneasy. Um, your children need to hear constructive, non-toxic communication. They
oh,
need positive. Uh, they're looking to you to be solid. That they don't need you to be panicky or fearful or angry or frustrated. So present yourself as a safe place, where they can express their emotions. Stay off the roller coaster,
yes.
because they need stability, and so they need someone that they can look to. And that's a great place to start when you talk about how do you raise your, start right there. Start with,
Mhm.
I'm going to be the adult, and I'm going to be the healthy one, and
I'm gonna be, let's start there. Yes,
yeah,
that's a great place to start. Well, and I shared this when I was with the Shield Maidens, the moms out there. It's called Lakeland Christian School Vikings. That's where the Shield Maidens it comes from. In case people are like Shield Maidens, but anyways,
yeah.
um, but I shared this. I had interviewed on one of my previous Scar Stories, Dina Yoy, whose daughter is the whole reason why the organization To Write Love on Her Arms got started. And that's based out of Orlando, but it's worldwide now. And she said she had sat down with her daughter who was, had an addictive personality, self harming, mental illnesses, and was just like, what do you need from me in order for you to get healthy? And Dina said, she was ready to write down this huge list of things that her daughter was going to need. And all her daughter said, she looked at her and she said, I need you to get healthy because then that takes the pressure off of me. I'm not worried about how I'm affecting you. Basically, like you're the adult and you're able to take care of yourself, which in turn, then you can take care of me. So, if you weren't able to write down what he said constructive, non toxic communication, be solid and get off the roller coaster. I think that is a great way to end. I love it, Darren. Thank you so much for your time. And again, if some of you are in the area and you're like, where is this school? It's Lakeland Christian School in Lakeland, Florida. It's awesome. Darren Copeland, he's not on any social media, but you can find his wife, Jennifer Wise Copeland, on social media. But, anyways, thanks, Darren. I hope you have a great day and thanks for joining us at Scar Stories.
My pleasure.